Hey guys, today we have a new story for you, and this one is quite different from the others I usually bring. This time, the protagonist managed to obtain a ring, and through this ring, he gained powers in an unusual way. Now imagine you're living in the middle of an apocalypse, running through the city, carrying your sister on your back to try to save her, when suddenly you find yourself in a completely unknown situation. It's a ritual temple, lightning bolts are falling around, and then blackout. When he wakes up, he wonders why he's in this place. Time passes, and in the crowd he meets a girl who asks him to fight and become stronger to survive. Later, the same girl thanks the protagonist for protecting and saving her life. Now, her life belongs to him. He can do whatever he wants with her. This gives him the motivation to fight monsters, leading to a very rare evolution. But to truly understand everything that's happening, we need to go back to the beginning. In a distant land, lightning struck, and that's where the protagonist woke up. In front of him, an orc pointed at him, declaring that a human had appeared. Humans had been banished from this sacred territory, and not a single one had dared to step foot there, until now. Hearing all this, the protagonist starts to realize that this might be a declaration of war. The crowd demands punishment for the boy. He doesn't understand. Just moments ago, he was inside a cave, and now he's in this completely unfamiliar place. The pressure is overwhelming, and he wonders if he's really going to die in another world for no reason. But 5 hours earlier, we find Q in a cafeteria, calmly eating. The boss appears, urging him to hurry up, or else he'll be left behind. The leader approaches the stall, mentioning that many scavengers are competing there. Q understands, but he wonders, why are so many people here? What's so special about this dungeon? The boss doesn't know much either, but one thing is certain. They need to go inside to collect items. As they talk and the protagonist eats, a guy in the background calls for him, mentioning that the heroes are about to appear. He tells Kang to speed things up. So, after quickly finishing his meal, Kang comments that this is a rank C dungeon. Imagine a rank A dungeon. Just this one makes his heart race. Inside the portal, some heroes note how strange it is. There are only low-class demons inside, making it incredibly easy for them to clear everything without difficulty. Soon after, the scavengers arrive and decide to enter. Before going in, the heroes discuss others who are making a lot of money. That's when we are introduced to Kiang, who dismisses their talk, saying it has nothing to do with them. The scavengers, wearing their cleaning uniforms, are only responsible for collecting the leftovers from the heroes' battles. They are commonly known as collectors. Initially, they had tried to become heroes, but their physical abilities weren't enough, so they failed. Now they work as scavengers, entering low-rank dungeons hoping to find valuable items. The group is told to stop chatting and move faster. They need to clear the dungeon as quickly as possible. They start searching everywhere, and one of them finds something. A fragment of a warrior's shield. It's a lucky find. And he even thinks that the protagonist's father must be watching over him from above. Feeling encouraged by this luck, the boy decides to go even deeper into the dungeon, hoping to find something valuable. 3 hours later, he can't believe it. After digging through everything, he found nothing except another shield fragment. Just as he's about to give up, someone calls out to Kiang, telling him to return. He says he will, but first, he needs to check something. If he doesn't find anything today, he won't have anything to eat. Looking around, he spots something unusual. A well. Curious, he wonders what could be inside. If there's treasure in there, his day would be saved. He could finally pay for his sister's hospital bills. Looking down, he sees a light coming from deep inside the well. From a distance, he notices what appears to be a ring. Without hesitation, he climbs down to get it. When he finally reaches it and examines it closely, he realizes he hit the jackpot. This is a rare ring, one that could make him incredibly rich if sold. It would fetch to make sure he doesn't lose it, he decides to put it on his finger. The moment he does, he starts feeling strange. Suddenly, he hears a voice. Blonde ring. The ring has recognized him as its master. Startled by the voice, he wonders where it's coming from. But then, looking at the palm of his hand, a light begins to emerge out of nowhere. That was it. Out of nowhere. That thing started sucking him into that light. He could only cry for help. his voice echoing through that well. His uncle, who was nearby, somewhat realized that something had happened to the protagonist. He should be checking it out. And besides, there was no way that boy could survive if something happened to him down there inside that well. He was a boy with a small physique, but in exchange, at least he worked hard. After that, we see the protagonist still being pulled in, and only later does he wake up in this place. He realizes he is already tied up and surrounded by these beast zombies, having now basically become their prisoner. This place is called Divine Punishment. It is also the sacred land of the Beast Kingdom, and by his misfortune, he ended up falling face first into this unknown world. Now he finds himself face to face with the Beast King. The king ordered the proceedings for his judgment. The orc commented that there would be 3 trials today. One of them was about a former ally who betrayed them by selling precious information to the humans. That's how we caught him. An elder orc was brought forward, and people started shouting, calling him a traitor. Then, he was forced to put his head in a place where he wouldn't live for much longer. One of the orcs pushed the elder orc forward, saying that the great sacred altar of their tribe, the Lightning Heimer, would completely subjugate him, erasing all of his sins. At that moment, a bolt of lightning struck the orc, frying him while the entire orc tribe celebrated. Next up was the human. This human had challenged their tribe, entering their territory without permission, something they would no longer tolerate. They grabbed the protagonist and prepared to punish him. The people around started shouting for him to be executed in the worst possible way. As he was being held, he begged them to stop. He had no idea what was happening. However, the superior orc simply punched him in the stomach, knocking him unconscious. While fading out, he muttered that he couldn't die here. His sister was waiting for him. He had to survive. Lying on the ground, he asked what was happening. The orcs behind him demanded that this human be judged by the sacred power. Then someone shouted, "Divine punishment!" And from behind him, a bolt of lightning appeared. At the last moment, he muttered once more that he couldn't die here. The lightning bolt nearly struck him, but it missed because he managed to dodge. The orcs were astonished to see him evade it. Even the superior orc was surprised, as no one had ever escaped divine punishment before. However, the Beast King simply stared at the human. The human, in turn, began cursing everyone there, calling them idiots. But due to his lack of concentration, another bolt of lightning appeared and finally struck him. As the superior orc had just said, no human had ever escaped punishment. After the human was punished, the next one was up, but at that moment, the protagonist continued repeating the same thing. He couldn't die here. As he kept saying this, a ring on his side began to glow. It was the ring he had found. Then, the system appeared, announcing that he had activated the divine selection system. After activating it, his body began glowing in an unknown way, and then the system started reconstructing his body. His body was being rebuilt. The Beast King, who had been silently observing, found it strange. Suddenly, another lightning bolt fell upon the protagonist. This shocked the superior orc, who realized the boy was still alive. After one bolt, another one struck him, but the system announced that the reconstruction was still at 15%. The orcs couldn't believe what they were seeing. Everyone stood there, mouths agape, as lightning bolts continuously rained down on the protagonist. But none of them had any effect, as they were quickly repelled by something unknown. Then the system screen appeared, indicating that the strongest body was being reconstructed, now at 40%. The system also granted him an ability, the Eye of the Sky. As he moved forward, he sensed that something was connected to him. He continued walking toward the top of the ritual site. As he advanced, he noticed a hammer above, which caught his attention. As he moved closer, the system showed his progress at 60%. He had gained several other interesting things from the system. The orcs, who had been celebrating the protagonist's death just moments ago, fell completely silent. Finally, the boy reached the top of the ritual site, with the reconstruction progress now at 80%. The superior orc couldn't believe it. "This is impossible! No one in this world has ever gotten this far." The Beast King, who had been watching in boredom, was suddenly intrigued. The boy was truly attempting to claim the king's hammer. However, A voice questioned whether he was calling for it. The boy ignored the voice and simply gripped the hammer with all his strength. As he lifted the hammer, the voice continued asking why he was calling it. Finally, the system completed the protagonist's reconstruction, reaching 100%. As a result, he unlocked a unique trait, the chosen by the heavens. A loud roar echoed throughout the mysterious land he was in. This moment made the protagonist something akin to Thor. Everyone now recognized him as one of the most powerful beings. At this moment, one of the most formidable forces the beast world had ever seen as an ally was reborn. As all of this unfolded, the protagonist stood in the midst of the scene. The orcs were speechless. The system appeared once again, indicating that the hammer had acknowledged him. Now that he had truly pulled it from the altar, it would grant him whatever he desired. A system screen appeared, showing the hammer's statistics. The hammer was quite powerful and had unlocked new abilities for him. However, our waifu is surprised. She can't believe it. The boy actually managed to lift that hammer. The superior orc, who hears and sees everything happening, became furious. How could that human dare to do such a thing? Even he, the king of the tribe, had not been able to so much as touch or lift that hammer. How could a weak human accomplish such a feat? According to the tribe's prophecy, whoever manages to lift that hammer will be the future leader of the tribe. While the orc pondered over what this meant for the tribe's future, we returned to the protagonist who was staring at the thing that had appeared in front of him. The system screen, which showed his points increasing, but he also felt something different. His body was a little stronger. What puzzled him, however, was this divine selection system. While he was still staring at the system, the superior orc appeared behind him. As soon as he arrived, he called out to the human, demanding to know how he had dared to lift the hammer of the gods. When the superior orc stood in front of the human, the weaker orcs rejoiced, glad that their leader wouldn't allow a mere human to take control of their tribe. Facing the protagonist, the orc wondered what kind of trick he had used to make the hammer come to him. Now, for humiliating almost everyone by lifting it, the orc declared he would punish him. The protagonist, caught in the middle of all this, paid no attention to the orc. Instead, his focus was on the system screen, which displayed a new ability, Eye of the Sky. He questioned what it was, and to find out, he activated the skill. Before him, the stats of the orc in front of him appeared. He had reached level 84. His ranking was A, and the danger was imminent. Facing a monster like him was terrifying. The Eye of the Sky was quite an interesting ability. Perhaps he could use it only because of the system, which gave him the advantage of seeing the orc's stats. However, the protagonist never considered backing down. The orc realized this was a challenge. Was the human really defying him? The protagonist, on the other hand, insisted that this was all a misunderstanding. He didn't want to fight against a level 84 warrior. After all, he hadn't even become a hero yet, and he definitely didn't want to die so soon. But it was too late. The orc raised his club. The protagonist pleaded for at least one final request. As he tried to speak, our waifu stood behind him, thinking that this human was doomed. Fang, the general, was one of the 5 strongest generals in the Beast Kingdom. A direct attack from him on a human was simply impossible to defend against. Just as she commented on this, an explosion erupted atop the altar. Moments later, we saw what had actually happened. The protagonist, through sheer brute strength, had managed to block the orc's sword. Clenching his teeth with all his might, he questioned how he had been able to defend against that attack. It wasn't really him. It was the hammer he was holding. The hammer had insane durability. Still, he was shocked. How had that human managed to dodge and block his most powerful strike? And not just that, how had he absorbed the full impact of the shockwave? After everything, the orc scoffed, saying that the boy had just gotten lucky. If it weren't for the hammer, he'd be dead. Then he ordered the protagonist to prepare himself, because his next attack would make his head roll. But the protagonist interrupted him, saying that he didn't belong to this world. The orc, however, ordered him to shut up. He talked too much. He attacked the protagonist with his bare hand, grabbing him. In this situation, he could do nothing. He had managed to defend himself against the sword, but now he wondered if he could survive this next attack. Lifted into the air, the protagonist looked down at the system screen, which displayed another new ability, replication. This skill allowed him to copy any kind of ability, and each copied ability would only grow stronger over time. He wondered if it would be useful in this moment. However, in order to copy his opponent's ability, he needed to touch his heart. Determined, he tried everything. He stretched out his hand, and after multiple attempts, he finally managed to reach for the orc's heart. At that moment, the orc made a strange expression. And then, inside the protagonist's mind, several cards appear in front of him. Looking at them, he wonders if he can really choose any of them. But looking down, he finds the irritated orc now facing the protagonist, saying that he has no salvation. Among the abilities that caught the most attention was that of the hammer. By acquiring this ability, he can continuously improve the hammer he holds in his hands. However, on the other hand, the orc was furious with him for having dared to touch his beloved heart. But the protagonist doesn't have much time to question or worry about this, as he uses the strike that shakes the heavens. As soon as he activates this ability, the orc is surprised. How can he use such a movement? Then, the protagonist uses that ability C on the orc, and in that place, there is only an explosion. As soon as the explosion occurs, we look behind and see the scorched remains. The waifu was in the same state. Meanwhile, as for the protagonist, we see the orc now standing amidst thick smoke. However, once the smoke dissipates, he begins to check himself to see if anything had happened. But after a moment, he realizes that nothing happened. The attack the protagonist unleashed on him was useless. Only later is it revealed that the ability he copied was at level 3. And because it was only level 3, it didn't allow him to use 100% of its power, which resulted in minimal damage to his opponent. After reading this, the protagonist is left confused, just like the orc. The orc, now even more furious, rises, gripping his sword. He charges at the protagonist, declaring that this will be his end, that there will be no forgiveness here. He will ensure the protagonist meets his just demise. However, before he can do anything, someone appears in the background, telling him to stop. The one who ordered them to stop was the Beast King. The orc is immediately shocked. The Beast King has finally arrived. Now he is certain that this human will meet his end. From the top, we see something entirely unexpected. But suddenly, a cloud of smoke appears. It was the Beast King who had leaped down. Kang only feels the breeze of the wind brushing against his face. After the smoke dissipates, there we find the Beast King, kneeling before the protagonist. The waifu is in total disbelief. They don't understand why the Beast King would kneel before a mere human. The Beast King acknowledges that this human was chosen by the King of Hammers, and perhaps it is destiny. He has waited for millions and thousands of years. He then turns to the rest of the orcs and states that countless years have passed, and no one has ever managed to lift that hammer. But the human did. However, this does not excite the orcs. The Beast King steps back and declares that this human is the one chosen to lead the tribe into the future. As soon as he says this, we see the orcs' reaction. They do not fully agree with what the Beast King says. And after all of this, the Supreme Elder appears, commenting that the Beast King has misunderstood the prophecy. The one who lifted the hammer was not one of them. It was a human. But as soon as he says human, he turns and reprimands his superior, explaining that the prophecy never specified who it would be. It never said it had to be someone from the beast tribe. After saying all this, he remains silent, in deep thought. Meanwhile, he turns to the protagonist and asks for his name. The protagonist replies that it is Kang. Then he approaches Kang and questions whether he can truly bear the burden and weight of carrying that hammer. This is, in essence, carrying the tribe on his shoulders. But at the moment, it seems he is too weak. So, he orders him to leave and return after a specific year. When that time comes, he will personally guide the protagonist toward his destined path. If, by any chance, the protagonist fails to return within a year, he need not worry, for the mark placed on him will ensure that one of his guards guides him to where they are. Only in this way can he be recognized and accepted by the tribe. The protagonist doesn't fully understand. He looks to the side and sees a mass of orcs running toward him. Among them is his waifu. She tells him to go and return stronger. Kang remembers this girl and wonders what is happening. He uses his heaven's eye to analyze her statistics. At first, nothing seems particularly interesting except for one thing: her level. She is at level 32. At that moment, he realizes that she is incredibly strong. However, he wonders why the Beast tribe wanted to punish her. Despite everything he has heard, he thanks everyone and promises to return stronger. Perhaps it was a miracle that he survived. In the end, by surviving, he may finally be able to return to his own world. Thus, he accepts his challenge and will return in a year. But before he leaves, there is something he needs. He asks himself what it is. He then points in a certain direction and says he wants someone to accompany him on his journey. He points in the direction of the girl. The girl asks why he chose her. The protagonist responds that it is a token of appreciation for her warning, that he was able to be saved because of her. The scene then shifts to nighttime. Kang is leaning against the entrance of the tribe, lost in thought. He keeps wondering about the voice he heard when he put on the ring. Before he can disappear, he reads something inscribed there, stating that this ring cannot be removed. But in the end, he wonders, he could be returning to his world. But he doesn't have time for that answer because right behind him, she appears, saying that she is already ready. The protagonist then turns around, but as soon as he does, Qiang is surprised to see such beauty. At that moment, she tells the protagonist that because he managed to save her life, she wants to repay him. In return, she wants to offer everything good to the protagonist and will make him one of the strongest men in this tribe. The protagonist doesn't care about her beauty. What matters to him is what she said about a master. But he can't be thinking about these things right now. So, he just needs to act naturally in front of her. She then tells the protagonist that today she has done something very important in her life, something that means a lot to her. He has given her a second chance to survive. Also, since she was a child, no one had ever defended her even once. As a way of thanking him, she asks that he at least allow her to call him Master. She says that being able to live is a miracle, and because of that, she will do everything for the protagonist. With a face that shows he doesn't want to cause any trouble, he understands everything. But she insists that he at least proceed with the next steps to achieve his first evolutions. That way, he can finally begin his adventures. However, while walking around, he stops for a moment and starts thinking. He has his sister. He should worry more about her than about this girl. But then, the system screen appears in front of him, saying that he can now rest and that in 24 hours, he will return to this world again. After realizing that all of this was a portal that sent him here, he wonders if he can use it again to return to his real world. He then focuses his gaze on the ring and, after a moment, calls out for the portal. As soon as he does, he is sucked in. Only afterward, feeling relieved, he happily says that he has finally managed to return. Meanwhile, the girl is left alone, wondering where the protagonist has gone. In another dimension, the protagonist is happy that he has finally returned. He opens his eyes and, after a moment, realizes that he is truly back. The first thing he does is look ahead, searching for the most important thing: his powers. He opens the system screen and sees that his abilities are still there. Among them, he notices the hammer, confirming that the hammer from the other world has indeed come with him. But it also seems that something else has happened. He discovers that the experience points, XP, he gains in this world will be transferred to his character in the other world. While thinking about what to do next, his uncle suddenly appears. Qiang then asks what happened and whether he was trapped inside that hole for a long time. The protagonist realizes that, in that other dimension, he was probably there for more than 6 hours. However, his uncle tells him that he wasn't actually there for long at all. He only heard the protagonist calling for help, so they came right away. His uncle then tells him to stay calm because being trapped in the Hole might have made time feel like it was passing faster. He then throws a rope to the protagonist, and Qiang grabs it and starts climbing. Only now does he understand. The time here had stopped while he was in the other world, but now that he has left that world, he wonders if time there has also frozen. He also questions who that ring belonged to. Perhaps it was someone very important from the other world. Now that he has finally climbed back up, the protagonist asks his uncle a question. It is about an upcoming event, the revelation and evaluation of people who wish to become heroes. He desires to become one. However, the scene shifts back a little to a rainy moment. We see the protagonist completely drenched in the rain, sweating a little and bleeding at the same time. On his back, he carries his sister as he walks through the city while the rain pours down. He passes by the wreckage of buildings, cars, and people running in panic. Ahead of him, a powerful monster appears, one of the creatures responsible for all this destruction in the city. However, his main objective is to survive and ensure his sister survives as well. She, on the other hand, is worried about their parents, wondering if they are still alive. As she speaks about this, debris begins to fall, heading straight toward the protagonist. He stands still, trembling in fear, and looks up, only to see that the monster has now gotten even closer to him. He then starts to cry, but he couldn't just stand there. Suddenly, an unknown hand appears. This person asks why you was there, but upon looking at the boy, he understands that he is not in a good state. So he shouts for him to pull himself together because if he were to die here, what would happen to his sister? He needed to live, at the very least, to fight against those monsters and take revenge. But it wasn't just that. His sister's legs weren't normal. However, he asks for her to be taken to the hospital immediately. The scene then shifts to the present. She asks the protagonist if he really wants to try becoming a hero again. But noticing that he is quite tired, she tells him to at least rest a little if he really cares about her. However, he, on the other hand, reveals that he doesn't need to, as he is already well rested. He then reveals to us that his sister ended up developing a rather rare disease. She feels extreme pain, but to stop it, she has to take medication. However, she is already used to it, so she doesn't mind much. Yet Yu realizes that Shawan is not living a good life. She can't walk properly, and on top of that, she spends the entire day in pain. Because of this, our protagonist uses the Eye of the Sky, which allows him to see that she has lost both legs. This has caused her to experience intense pain throughout her body. She could no longer be the same as before. She used to smile. She used to go to school normally, but now she finds herself in this condition. However, he also notices that there is a 1% chance for her to be able to walk again. After thinking about what to do, we see the boy walking through the city. As he walks, he comments that his sister is suffering. He cannot leave her like this. She is the only family he has left. For that reason, he needs to turn that 1% chance into reality. The system says there is a 1% chance of her walking again, which means it is not 0%. To achieve this, he needs to become a hero. By becoming a hero, he will be able to gain very useful information that will lead him to a certain cure capable of healing her. In the meantime, he believes that he will succeed. For this, he raises his hand toward the sky with the goal of achieving everything good for her. The people around him don't understand anything. But then the scene shifts to another place where people can awaken powers. One of the guys ends up awakening a power. Now he can become a hero. At this moment, the boy's mother appears, commenting that he did something incredible and that his future could be great. But now, the next one is someone called Kang. People wonder why this boy keeps trying again. The last time he tried, he had the lowest score, so there is no way he could become a hero. However, they still proceed, asking him to step forward and place his hand on the mana detector. If he could obtain power, he could become a hero. But then, one of the scientists tells him not to get his hopes up too much, as he likely won't be able to become a hero, so there's no point in trying. He looks at Kang and notices that the boy has good muscles. But he has seen many people like that who failed to gain anything. However, confident, Kang enters the room and places his hand on the detector to measure his power. He realizes that he is now at level 3, meaning he is likely qualified to become a hero. Because of this, he needs to take things more seriously, and he truly does. As he places his hand, we see the device absorbing some of his mana. However, something serious happens. The entire place turns red, and everything starts to react. The person measuring the protagonist's power is shocked. Only after a while is his power revealed. The protagonist's power level is currently 5,400, which makes everyone happy, as he has set a new record for heroes who awakened at level 3. The last hero to break this record was Locke, who had a score of 930, but this record had not been surpassed for 30 years. Now, he has reached 5,400 points. He already knew this would happen, but he didn't expect it to happen here and now. This was unexpected for the boy. Now, all happy, he crouches down, but he asks to wait a bit. He wanted to know how much power that divine hammer of his had. To do that, he grabs the hammer from the system, but the moment he picks it up, the system appears, saying that he does not have the strength to wield the king's hammer. To do so, he needed to level up. He realizes this, but it was still possible to use it. He manages to use the hammer's power for a second. That wouldn't be too much of a problem for him if he used it while holding that power gauge. So he grips the hammer, and for a second, he activates its power. The moment he does, all of his energy is drained, but this would only last for a second. He is surprised by this. The hammer completely drained his energy. The protagonist is shocked, but the energy coming from the hammer was immense. However, what he really wanted to know was just how much power that hammer had. He was very curious. At that moment, lightning starts forming outside the area. The bolts strike the building, making everything tremble, including a power gauge. However, since a lightning bolt struck, the power in the entire building went out. Someone comes to check what happened, but when he arrives, he is met with a surprise. He finds the protagonist, but now in an extremely thin and frail state. He even wonders what happened to the boy, but the protagonist simply says he is fine. Then he walks down the corridor. At first, he had been reckless. 1 second was enough to drain all his strength. However, he ignores all of that, because now he had finally become a hero. The scene then shifts to the next day, at the training site. We see the protagonist gathered with other heroes. One of them is training the rookies. He was a level 9 guy with a power of 1,200, and his hero code name was Kaya. However, when the protagonist looks at him, he is surprised. 1,200? He himself was only level 3 and had 5,400. The kid now imagines how much power he would have once he reached level 9. But the scene shifts back to the instructor, who was irritated. He had been assigned the temporary position of teacher to guide these students. He didn't like it at all. So since he disliked it, he told the rookies to get ready because on the next day, he would be guiding them to more dungeons. Upon hearing this, one of the students raises their hand, asking Kaya to wait a bit. The rookies should at least have a week of physical training before entering their first dungeon. The instructor questions why, after all, they were going to become heroes, something they should be grateful for. Fresh recruits didn't need to be coddled, and to ensure that he would make them suffer as much as possible so that in the future, they would become strong heroes. However, from the background, the protagonist notices that this guy is irritated. It was likely that he was quite angry today and wanted to use the students as punching bags. But now he doesn't care much about this guy because he has that girl who will be guiding him to higher levels. With a grin and blood dripping from his nose, he eagerly waits for the next day. The next day arrives. The protagonist is preparing himself, while on the news, they talk about a dreadful earthquake that occurred in another part of the planet. However, he doesn't worry about that now. His focus is on entering that other world. He takes his ring, puts it on, and activates the dimensional channel. The ring begins to glow, and after that glow, the protagonist is suddenly transported to that other dimension. There, he opens his eyes and now realizes he is back in the same place he had left before. His clothes were in the same condition too, meaning that everything in this world belonged to this world. Just then, she appears in front of the protagonist and asks if something was wrong. He replies that everything is fine. Then, clenching his fists, he asks her to get ready because their adventure was about to begin. Excited, she comments that they were finally starting. Nearby, there were some level 3 goblins. It would be good for him to fight them. The bad part was that these creatures tended to gather in large groups. But the protagonist doesn't care about that. What he is more focused on is the fact that she was worried about him. Still, he doesn't let it bother him because he has the system on his side. The system also gives him his first mission: clear out the goblin's base. With that goal, they advance into a dark alley. We see the protagonist arriving at the entrance of a cave. She warns him to stay quiet, or else he would attract the goblin's attention. However, the protagonist notices that his level is 72. He asks her why she doesn't just go in and kill some goblins herself, but as soon as he mentions his level, she is left speechless. How is that possible? 3054. The protagonist realizes that his level is 72. He asks her why she doesn't go there and kill some of the goblins, but as soon as he mentions his level, she wonders how the boy knew she was level 72. To this, he ends up saying that he got some things from the system, but that wasn't very important. He asks her to go ahead and wreak havoc on the goblins, but she says that if she does that, it's very likely that the protagonist won't gain even a single XP. He feels sad because at first, he thought XP was distributed. Since our protagonist insists, she fights first to figure out how to defeat the goblins. She really does this for the protagonist. Then, she stands up with her dagger in hand and starts moving towards one of the goblins that was idly standing in front of the portal. Only after she moved forward, we see the goblins being cut down. It is very likely that everyone was killed. At that moment, with an incredible pose, the protagonist is seen in the background, praising her. She was someone at level 72 and really demonstrated her strength right in front of him. However, while he congratulates her, she looks sad. Perhaps she embarrassed the protagonist. One of the things she did to defeat those weak monsters was to give it her all. And that was what he needed to do. However, before she could continue, the protagonist asked her to teach him her abilities. But she refused, as those abilities were something he still couldn't learn. On the other hand, he said it was normal. He was only level 3. He had now chosen the warrior class. With the warrior class, he would have more advantages, as he also couldn't use that divine class hammer yet. After saying all this, she approaches him and then grabs his hand. Since he chose the warrior class, she had no choice. She would teach him how to use that ability, and not only that, she would also make him one of the strongest warriors. On the other hand, our protagonist realizes that this girl from another world was very kind. Now that he had learned, he could go all out. Suddenly, one of the goblins in the background notices the presence of the humans. Realizing their presence, they start advancing towards the protagonist. At this moment, he sees an opportunity to train his abilities. He asks to borrow her dagger for a bit. It is revealed that he borrowed a silver class dagger. At first, she is worried about him, but he reassures her that he's fine, as he had copied some abilities from a superior orc. He wanted to test them now for precision since last time Thor's hammer didn't do much damage. So, he prepares himself. After taking a deep breath, he lunges forward at the goblins in front of him. Jumping up, he crouches down, and with a single move, he cracks the ground, taking down all the goblins. She is left speechless. A level 3 guy managed to kill so many goblins like that. The last time she was here, it was necessary to have level 6 equipment to complete this dungeon. However, for Kang, these monsters were far too weak. He then comments that tonight, he will make sure the system levels him up to level 4. After some time farming here, they move forward. Now it's time to return the dagger to her. After giving it back, he picks up a piece of a staff from the ground. He thinks this is already good enough, but she comments that it's not ideal, as this was an urgent mission, and using basic level equipment would only hinder them. Looking back, he notices the presence of more goblins. Now that he takes a closer look, the system shows him that his defense rating was 0. He also realizes that the weapon he holds had no chance of keeping him alive for long. So, he would have to give it his all to fight these monsters. But there was something else he noticed. his spiritual backpack. He could store any type of item in it. Any item placed inside the backpack would also be accessible in the other world. To him, this was quite interesting. Opening the backpack, he sees that a slot is already occupied. This was by the hammer. It seems that training and growth work in a way that the more you use it, the more space you get in the backpack. However, he didn't know how much space would be added. It was also impossible to discard the hammer, not even in the other world. The complete set of equipment he had in the real world was divided into 5 parts. Looking at her, she asks the protagonist what was wrong since he had a strange expression on his face. While she talked about this, the protagonist begins to imagine some indecent things. However, he comments that it was nothing. He was just worried about her. She then gets into a battle stance, as in front of her appears one of the goblins, who seemed happy. One of the reasons he was happy was because he had found a female, and to them, that was a good thing. At this moment, the protagonist might not be able to fight against the goblins, but she could. However, if she fought, the protagonist wouldn't gain any XP. While he hesitated on what to do, the goblins got closer and closer to his group. But the protagonist quickly moves, wielding that piece of wood, striking it down on the goblins. This attack completely obliterates them. Some still survived, but only for now. He picks up the piece of wood he had once again and smashes it on top of the last goblin's head to really defeat that thing once and for all. Only after defeating the goblins does he feel happy because he realizes that the higher his opponent's level, the more experience points he is gaining. However, the weapon he was holding in his hand seemed too bad to be his own, but at least the weapon was quite durable. While he was happy about this, behind him, she, our me, was left speechless. She couldn't believe that the protagonist, with just one strike, managed to defeat not just 3 but 4 goblins at once. All the goblins were at level 4. This was incredible. And once again, the protagonist continued killing goblins, and his XP kept increasing more and more. As he killed the goblins, he felt extremely happy because here, he could gain a lot of experience. Something that in his real world wouldn't happen so easily. Back in real life, when he worked as a janitor, he had heard from the heroes that they were fighting monsters, but the monsters were too strong. Yet in the end, the monsters didn't give them much XP. And now, if they really wanted to farm XP, they had to form groups. But by forming a group, they couldn't earn much XP individually. The group, however, could gather a lot of money for themselves, which in the end meant there wasn't much left for anyone. But now, being alone against these monsters, he could gain a lot of XP and many things for himself. Looking down, he saw his level rising. This was incredible for him. From now on, he would keep leveling up infinitely. So his goal now was to advance until he reached the boss's hall. After some time, he finally arrived there. They hid behind a rock to avoid being spotted. But our protagonist wanted to take a peek. As he looked to the side, he noticed the boss's presence. This boss didn't seem to be a completely weak one. However, our waifu beside him felt somewhat disappointed. She couldn't believe that, for the first time, the boss the protagonist would fight would be as strong as this one. Hearing this, our protagonist even understood that perhaps some supreme power existed in this world. He even asked her about it, but for him, there was no need to worry. The presence of that goblin standing there behind him felt too similar to the presence of the monster that had killed his parents. He was surprised by this. He even wondered if, by any chance, there could be some kind of connection between this world and the other one lost in his mind. Then she appeared, asking the protagonist not to underestimate this monster. It was a level 6 boss, but had been possessed by a dark demon, which only made it even stronger. In short, the dark demon was a terrifying and mysterious creature. Not only did it have incomprehensible power, but its very existence was a mystery. To settle this fight, she asked him to at least let her handle this boss. However, looking at the boy, she noticed that he seemed strange. This was because something really didn't feel right. That thing standing in front of him was truly the one that had killed the protagonist's parents. But because he had revealed his presence, The weaker goblins and the boss noticed him. The boss then released an aura toward the protagonist. And while she was caught in this situation, the boss started walking towards them. On the other hand, Kang no longer cared about the power of this boss. Consumed by fury and hatred, he charged toward the boss. With just one move and that same piece of wood, he struck the boss's head. However, this boss was different. The boss landed a blow on the protagonist, launching him backward. Moments later, we see him lying on the ground, completely down, but not unconscious yet. He was shocked by the monster's sheer strength. But the monster, which had been standing still, suddenly decided to open its mouth. The moment it did, its tongue shot toward the fallen protagonist. Just before he could be caught by the monster's tongue, she appeared from the background and managed to stop the monster's movement. With just one strike, she completely severed its tongue. The protagonist then realized that she had decided to show up at that moment. But this monster really wanted to kill him. However, for him, this was nothing but a matter of revenge. He could finally avenge his parents, who had been killed by this monster. He could not allow himself to be killed by a low-level dark demon goblin like this. So to make sure of that, he activated his strongest body, and as soon as he activating this ability, his fist starts to grow, and soon, a part of his body begins to expand more and more. However, he still needed more strength to defeat this boss. The system then comments that it was necessary to concentrate all his energy into just one arm, and only then might he be able to completely defeat the boss. Following this advice, we see his arm growing and growing to the point where it becomes extremely powerful. Only then does he begin to move towards the BOSS in front of him. The boss in front of him simply couldn't do anything because the protagonist, moving at high speed, managed to get close. Once he was close, he threw a punch directly at the boss. The moment that punch landed, we saw the boss being sent flying at an incredible speed. While all of this was happening, in the background, we see our waifu watching everything unfold. She is just as impressed with the boy's strength. Just a moment ago, there was this monstrous enemy in front of her, but now, what she truly saw before her was Kang, completely breathless after managing to take down that boss. As soon as he defeated the boss, he gained 1,000 experience points and 1,000 points in total. But after using such a powerful ability, we see that his arm was completely wrecked. The boy had put everything into that one strike, and now his arm was utterly destroyed. However, for him, pain was no longer something he could even feel. Dark demons like this one all deserved to die. Perhaps in exchange for all of this, it was worth it, because the boy managed to reach level 4. After our hero crushed that monster, we see the damage that his arm took. The girl wondered if he was okay, but the system informed her that he wasn't in good condition at all. He needed some healing, or else he wouldn't survive for much longer. Our protagonist also couldn't stay conscious for too long. He started to collapse. Seeing this, she ran towards him, caught him, and placed him on her lap. Now holding him, she told him not to worry because she had some healing potions. She then took out a potion and applied it to the protagonist. Slowly, he began to recover. As he stood up, he realized that the healing potion worked well, though its recovery process was a bit slow. Still, it was incredibly effective. It completely healed his wounds. He stood up feeling as if his life had been renewed. Our hero commented that he felt more than just recovered, but the girl pointed out that now that he had defeated the boss, they could finally claim the reward chest. Both of them became excited and moved deeper into the cave. Because he had managed to defeat this boss, he received a greater reward than usual. As they ventured into the cave, she found the chest and pointed in its direction. The protagonist slowly approached it. As he got closer, he noticed that it had a familiar appearance, similar to something he had seen at the beginning of his journey. Moving toward the chest, he realized that its design was stunning. He then decided to open it. The moment he opened the chest, he obtained something new, a set of black noble's robes. This meant that he now had clothing that would help protect him against powerful monsters. He could store this item in his inventory, where he didn't have many things yet, but keeping this armor there would be extremely useful. He opened his inventory space and placed the armor inside. However, Seeing his tattered clothing, the girl made a strange face and asked if he was okay. She understood that his clothes were torn, but she had been carrying a sewing kit since childhood, which would be incredibly useful now. Half an hour later, we find her working under the moonlight. After a long period of sewing, she finally finished repairing his clothes. She asked the protagonist if this was how he wanted them, and he agreed. Now that he had a good set of equipment, he could finally return to his world. Returning to his world, they could finally rest. As night fell, we see the protagonist's normal room, until suddenly a portal appeared in the middle of it. He stepped out of the portal. From that portal, he appears and goes straight to lie down on her bed. After walking for a long time in the forest, they finally find a peaceful place to rest. However, he cannot stay in that world just like that, so he quietly sneaks away. But upon returning to that world, he will be bringing her a delicious meal, and in this world, he has already made quite good progress. However, the next day, we see our protagonist very happy because now he could equip himself with the Code of the Black Nobles. He could press yes or no, but in the end, he ends up pressing yes right away. This ability, let's say, is quite special. When activated, it emits an extremely annoying roar that stuns his enemy, or can even freeze them. But this could also grant him rather special abilities from the Traj. However, if he goes out wearing this equipment now, it will be quite bad. People, most likely inside the greedy dungeon, would die trying to take his item by force. And for a novice like him, he shouldn't be using such strong armor. So he should store the @V in the option where he could hide this armor. And this, he finds interesting. He hides it, and it disappears. Now that everything is settled, R should be leaving. But just as he was thinking about leaving the Toka, he wonders who it could be, until he hears that someone decided to mess with his sister. Worried, he tries to see who was doing this. The person there was about to touch her, but upon hearing all this, our protagonist simply becomes filled with rage. Holding back, he ends up breaking in fury and hatred. He decides to leave the house. As he opens the door, the scene cuts to the hospital. At the hospital, we see her asking them to let her go since she doesn't even know them. And to tell the truth, she really doesn't know them. But her brother, Kang, recognizes them very well, as he himself borrowed money from them, and to this day hasn't paid a single cent. Since he wouldn't be able to pay off the debt he owed, they might be taking his sister to sell on the black market. But she, curious, ends up wondering what contract our protagonist also signed. He wouldn't sign idiotic contracts, which makes him happy. She then shows the paper with the contract he signed. And then, this thing over the protagonist's sister starts making some threats. After making several threats, we observe from the back door that nothing is happening, until suddenly, the door is somehow ripped off and shattered. The one who broke the door was the protagonist, and as soon as Kei sees the whole scene, she becomes extremely irritated and simply demands that those bastards take their hands off her sister. Everyone in the room falls silent. His sister is happy with his presence, but he ends up wondering what he was doing here since he couldn't pay his debt, or why he was so angry. He is entering that room, so he should act normally. However, while he is speaking, the protagonist appears and punches him in the face, immediately knocking out one of his teeth. The first punch makes him spin slightly in the air before falling to the ground. However, as he falls to the ground, one of their guards appears and goes toward the protagonist. His goal was to defeat him, but that did not happen, because as the punch was approaching the protagonist, he prepared a punch of his own and struck directly against it. His punch was strong enough to create a considerable impact, twisting the other man's arm slightly. After all that, the arrogant man gets up and starts wondering how he dares to stand up against him. And since he got up and refused to pay even a single debt, the arrogant man ends up drawing his gun and pointing it at him. Once he points it, he then decides to pull the trigger. The bullet flies as the protagonist's sister begs him to dodge it. The protagonist actually wanted to dodge, but Kiang didn't. Instead, he simply raises his hand and reaches toward the bullet, stopping it completely with just his hand. His sister is shocked, as are the guards behind, unable to believe how that weakling, Kaini, managed to catch a bullet. After that, he releases an incredibly powerful aura that makes all three of the bandits tremble. With everyone shaking, we see from outside the nurse calling for the guards to come quickly. If they don't interfere, someone inside could end up dying. Then, as she looks forward, she is surprised to see the men badly injured. But even though they're wounded, they don't back down. They say that if the protagonist doesn't pay, he'll be making a deal with another guy, someone much stronger. And the protagonist definitely wouldn't want them to call that powerful guy. The arrogant man then leaves but apologizes for all the mess. He says that soon he'll be sending in a certain general. That man is a level 10 fighter with a power rating of 2,300, more than enough to handle the protagonist. Their plan, which was supposed to go perfectly today, ended up failing because of the protagonist. And after leaving, the arrogant man comments that Zan will be in danger if she stays here alone. The protagonist can't come here every day, but he knows a level 10 guy will be coming around to cause trouble. He tells her not to worry too much since he'll be able to pay off his debt. But at the same time, there's no need to stress over it, since he also managed to become a hero. Hearing this, she is happy to see that he finally became a hero. However, to become a true hero, he still needs to pass a certain challenge. Today, he must descend into the cave to cover his sister's medical expenses. Maybe that part will be easy, but the Green Cobra gang has caused massive destruction. About 30,000 people have suffered at their hands. To deal with that, he needs to become stronger and earn money honestly. Moreover, he thinks that to get stronger faster, he needs to acquire equipment from another world. The scene then shifts to another location, where Kaya announces that no one else is allowed to enter. Those who have arrived are the only ones participating in today's event. They will likely be leaving a bit later, but for now, they will be entering the dungeon. If they manage to kill monsters and obtain good equipment, that equipment must be handed over to him immediately. He then asks if everyone understands what he just said. Only then does the protagonist comment that this guy is basically trying to take all the resources for himself. However, if some powerful guild turns a blind eye to it, he shouldn't worry too much. After all, this is only a rank B dungeon. What's the best thing that could be inside? But Kaya is a level 9 fighter. Because of this, he tells everyone present to stay behind him if they want protection. However, as compensation for being successfully protected, they will each have to pay him 1,000 points. Everyone agrees, except for one person, the protagonist. He raises his hand and asks why they have to pay an extra 1,000. He already paid at the beginning and even gave equipment to him. That's when someone from behind tells him to stop bothering that professor, otherwise bad things might happen to him. But the protagonist ignores the warning and starts talking about how the professor is underestimating the weak. The strong do whatever they want, making the weak pay up because, in the end, they will all eventually become heroes. The professor, however, refutes him, saying that if he doesn't even have enough money to pay the 1,000, then he might as well turn back. Why was this poor kid even here? Meanwhile, the students behind begin whispering about the protagonist, saying that he is being arrogant. Paying that extra 1,000 was basically a form of protection in case something happened inside the dungeon. But to the protagonist, it was fine, because he ended up applying for an individual evaluation, and that was exactly what he wanted. Everyone was surprised to see that he now wanted to enter the individual evaluation. Everyone was shocked. Even the instructor himself wondered if he really wanted to go in. It was an individual dungeon, and to confirm, he looked at the system and saw that the boy had indeed chosen to enter the individual dungeon. He thought this guy was crazy. Maybe that was just how the boy was. But the boy decided to enter anyway. He entered a ranked dungeon alone. Here, he could take down anyone. While he was thinking about this, a monster appeared from behind and struck his head with a club. But as we could see, nothing happened. Everyone wondered why such a weak monster would even try its luck. It was weak. He told the monster to get lost, but since it refused, he took the piece of wood from its hand and then swung it with all his strength. knocking the monster down completely. Now that he had dealt with these monsters, he realized that the experience points here were very low. Maybe if he earned what he had gained in the other world, it would be much more worthwhile. However, he asked these weak monsters not to attack him stealthily. In response, all the copper-ranked monsters gathered around the protagonist. But now, to play for real, he activated the armor he had received from the system. Only after activating it did he manage to take down all the monsters with a single blow. The portal opens. The instructor harshly criticizes the group, calling them incompetent and dependent on him. He questions the validity of their hero certificate and complains about his salary. Someone complains about the help given and the rejection of their magic, while another asks for silence since the test has been passed. The man says that he usually charges 2,000, but for them, 1,000 is already very generous. He, impatient, pressures the Hero Evaluation Center to speed up the process. The man questions the approval of that kid in the test. He asks how he passed the test alone and demands an answer. The guy investigated our kid, discovering that he is low level. His strength test has no record, and he considers him a novice. He asks if our kid used stolen items and says he could never pass the test alone. Speak up already. The protagonist seeks the unprecedented, challenging the impossible. The 1,000 coin reward motivates him on this journey. The guy feels provoked and rejects a gift. He questions the protagonist's identity and whether he knows the Mad Wolf Guild. Qiang tells Professor Kaya that his guild's level is concerning. The guy says the kid is looking for death and asks who he thinks he is. The protagonist blocks the strike with his glowing hand. He asks if the level 9 warrior's punch is meant to kill him. The man says that with this speed and strength, he shouldn't be just level 3 or 4. What is happening? He stammers upon seeing our kid. He draws his glowing dagger. The protagonist speaks, surprised and confused by the situation. The instructor asks what he is hiding. The protagonist uses an energy barrier to defend himself. The barrier displays data on defense and physical strength. The guy says the touch he felt wasn't flesh. He accuses the kid of hiding valuable equipment. The protagonist says he shouldn't have revealed his power so easily and that now the world knows his secrets, which will bring trouble. The man accuses the kid of possessing treasures, questioning whether he found or stole them. Qiang says he almost died of fright. He says that if the sword hadn't been so damaged, he would have died just now. And he says he fought and fought. The instructor demands identity confirmation from Qiang for heroism, and he agrees to do it. The guy says he arrived just in time and asks what he would do in front of the staff. The instructor smiles in a somewhat eerie way. Qiang observes the other guy, thoughtful and silent. He calls himself an idiot, despite his power and fighting. Frustrated, he laments being only level 4, unable to defend himself against powerful enemies. In the protagonist's apartment, the night is starry with a full moon. He feels threatened by Kaya's gaze, realizing he's gotten into trouble. He admits he doesn't know how to deal with girls with animal ears and regrets his lack of discretion, concluding that his level is low. Suspicious figures whisper in a dark hallway. One of them asks if this is the place and tells the other to stop. The other says he will use magic to trap him after breaking the door and asks to knock him out. The man talks about something he is taking. The instructor promises to share future treasures if he finds any. The man tells them to be quiet and not draw attention. He says he will use magic to break the lock and tells them to get ready. He uses fire magic to open the door. Qiang appears, breaking everything with a staff in hand. He laments being found so quickly. The protagonist demands submission and initiates an attack. She says they called a level 10 mage and that his level is 6 levels lower. The protagonist explains that combat power, 6,400 level 4, is an intuitive assessment. Higher levels compensate for lower combat power, and a 6-level difference overcomes the disadvantage. A level 3 warrior attacks a level 72 boss with swords. He takes massive damage and is defeated by the level 72 boss. Qiang says that maybe equipment and technique can be used. He continues, saying that making mistakes is not an option and slipping up is costly. The other guy says he was going to kill and take his things because he was fast. He uses fire magic. The protagonist praises the physical defense of goblin armor but criticizes its magical resistance. He compares the fight to goblins, emphasizing that weak creatures only use clubs. He says that fleeing is the best option and runs. Then he jumps off the building. He instructs himself to focus strength on his legs and use the armor to withstand the fall. Someone appears attacking from below with full force. The guy is caught by surprise and screams, questioning if he fell into an ambush. He says he didn't expect there to be 3 people together. He finds it easy to defeat weak opponents and reinforced his body before falling. The protagonist thanks the armor, as without it, he would already be unconscious. He says he didn't die, and that is surprising. The other asks what power he used to attack him as a rookie. The protagonist says that if they want his death, then they should die instead. He screams and enters attack mode. He commanded the black slime to attack. An explosion erupts in the street, launching fragments of slime. The protagonist laments the interruption of his ability. One guy says they will split the spoils after killing him. Another says he's glad he protected himself, and the third says that was their goal. The system announces that the ring's cooldown is over and the portal is ready. Qiang declares that the moment has come. The instructor announces the opening of the limitless channel. Then, our boy is attacked with explosive magic. Qiang threatens revenge, promising to come back stronger to make the 3 pay and see who dies first. He questions if he has arrived. The protagonist recognizes the need to refine his plan and skills, admitting that he underestimated the difficulty of the mission. He realizes he must grow stronger to protect and retaliate, and affirms that his fate is in his own hands. He asks where he can learn Beast Girl abilities. Qiang gets a nosebleed because he saw something. Qiang sees the girl, says he forgot, and she sleeps well when he leaves. He smells cherry blossoms and states that the scent is always present. A giant mushroom appears in full force. He says it is unforgivable and cannot be ignored, but he remembers the instructor ordering him to kill it. This discourages him. Qiang reproaches himself for his actions, feeling that he should prioritize real problems. He tells himself and his brother to stay calm, and he says he needs to plan how to level up and learn new skills. The next day, the girl says she hasn't slept this well in a long time and stretches. The protagonist claims to have slept well, asks for new clothes, and requests departure. The girl searches for scrolls to learn skills. She has heard of an easy way to enter the Battle Academy and learn there. They go to the small Battle Academy. The orc accuses the protagonist of being a spy for the Beast King and says that to enter the Battle Academy, one must be level 6 and pass the test, but he is level 4 and must leave. Qiang says it's very complicated and that he needs to pass the test to reach level 6. The girl claims to be unaware of the requirements, obtaining skills in specific locations, while the protagonist reassures her and decides to level up to 6. She says she knows some places nearby where he can level up. The orc criticizes the human, protected by the king and incapable in the academy. He reveals that he has brought a cheap half-breed, forming a perfect combination. The girl foresees that her inferior position will cause problems for the master, as his kindness will make him forget the hierarchy, which will bring future difficulties. She decides to protect him, believing in his kindness, planning to explain the situation and ask for permission to leave. He quickly looks back. The girl says, "Master," and he advances angrily. Grabbing the guy by the collar, he asks if he doubts that he will smash his mouth. Qiang states that he must apologize immediately to the pointy-eared girl. The orc asks what he is doing and says he only spoke the truth. He continues talking about half-breeds. He suspects that she is a hybrid of human and beast, as the celestial eye did not reveal her name. He notices that she never said it, suggesting that perhaps she does not even have one. Today's video is coming to an end, but before I go, comment below what you think of this protagonist. Did you like his attacks on our waifu? Or his revenge against those idiots who messed with his sister? Well, leave your thoughts in the comments. And if possible, don't forget to drop a like. But I guess I'll be going now. Maybe I'll see you around, or maybe just in the next episode.